And it's good to see you. We're all present except Nick hasn't punched in yet. And I'm sure will catch up as we move forward. Do we have guests on? No. So I don't think we need to introduce ourselves. We have no guests on on Zoom yet, so we'll get started with our meeting. Before we start, I should say that Saturday was Vermont Day at Eastern States, and they did break the attendance record that we set. I don't know if it was 2 years ago or when it was, but they had 170 some odd thousand people at the fair on Saturday, which is quite a number. And I know I couldn't be there this year, but I know the governor was there, and I don't know if any of you made it down there on Saturday, but the Vermont building, I guess, looked pretty nice. And if you haven't been there before, I think actually the Vermont building is the best looking building and most presentable building of the six. So anyways, to get started with today's agenda, and you should have all received that from Linda. We're going to hear from Dan in regards to our work and his work working on dairy issues over the past number of years. So Dan, I guess I'll turn it over to you to do your presentation.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So today, what my objective is to start the discussion about what an overorder price program might look like in Vermont in terms of the more specific elements that are involved. I started out trying to do the whole package, and it got too long, basically. So I've split it up into two parts. Yeah. Oh no, it disappeared. I practiced.
Sounds like you did well.
Hey, Dan, while we're waiting, can you tell me who's sitting next to you at the table, or are there guests there? Because I can see Representative O'Brien.
Andrew?
I'm Andrea Papiti from the Utility Commission. Hi.
Thank you.
You guys have to wait a minute. Oh. Sorry, everybody. I not only practiced this morning with Linda, I practiced last night at home.
Guess you should have gone to bed earlier.
Okay.
3 times the charm.
Thank you. This is amazing. Are you good at this? Where'd it go?
Oh,
That's what I'm looking for.
oh, okay.
So how do I share that?
Are you a co-host, Dan?
Yeah.
Need to go back to Zoom.
Dan knows better than to ask me to help.
Or me, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Is it maybe in the browser? Instead of in,
So,
click launch. Usually, oh, then try from your browser. Are you joined? Are you, you're probably not joined yet. That's probably why, right?
Let's see. You're already on the meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So go,
Is he on it as a co-host though?
can I just see what they
Oh,
have?
yeah, because it's showing up on the camera.
See, here's your PowerPoint, right?
where's my card?
Right,
This right here.
Yeah.
right. So that should be able to get out of this.
X.
Okay. Now,
We need a middle schooler or
bigger.
somebody's grandkid.
now go to, there.
No. Maybe here, I'll do this. This will work.
Yeah. Now you're sharing.
You're sharing.
Yeah.
Just go to.
Okay,
PowerPoint.
everybody, you're gonna get a tour of my documents.
How many people does it take to change a light bulb? Or to start soon?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Where'd it go?
We got Jackie in the corner.
I got it on my, it's on my screen now.
Dan, I can see your screen, but
Not the.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I pulled up the document.
Get out of share and try it again. Yeah. Let's try that.
Oh,
Eureka.
yeah, now we can see it.
Okay. So, as I said, I broke thank you for your indulgence. And we're actually still on time, Bobby. That was our introduction to screen sharing. So there's really two parts to doing overorder pricing, and the pooling is the first part and the pricing is the second. So in preparing this, what I did was go back through what's in the record. As Bobby said, I've been working on this for, some people say centuries, and it's begun to feel like that at times. But I think it's very important that the task force all have a common set of information that we're all working from. So pretty much everything that's in the presentation is drawn from either the economist from the market administrator, Brian Reardon, or Chris's testimony 2 weeks ago. If you remember, Julie came in from the Maine Dairy Industry Association, gave us an update, an explanation of how the Maine programs work that is very important to what we're doing. And Diane has kept us updated twice. The one piece that I brought in is down at the bottom, the Federal Market Administrator puts out every year an update to the statistical handbook, and it's now has data back to when the federal order was created in 2000. The current federal order was created in 2000. So there's basically 21, 22 years of comprehensive information in that book. And when we get to the slide, I have the website link. So as I said, I tried to do the presentation based on what's in the record. So it's my kind of collation, but it's what everybody has heard over the past meetings that we've had. Then I think the other piece that I would say by way of introduction is that I'm really just trying to be descriptive. I think I take very seriously that this is a collective decision that we're making, and I'm one of the collective group. So I'm really not trying to advocate for anything. I'm just trying to explain based on my experience how this might work, and then we have a discussion about whether it'll work. And that's for the task force to decide. So the primary issue that we're talking about is the establishment of a state over order. Order meaning directive by a state to regulate a marketplace. So we're dealing with milk market regulation, and then an order for the state, which would be the state specific regulation that is working above and in concert with the federal milk market order. So the Secretary of Agriculture issues an order after a hearing, and that order says all of the provisions that that Chris talked about 2 weeks ago. That's all in the order that the Secretary issues. And people have been confused. What does it mean, an order? Is it ordering the market? And to some extent it is, but it's an issuance of a directive as a matter of state regulation, or state or federal regulation. And the state over order, over means above what is set by the federal government. So the basic minimum price is set in federal regulation as an order issued by the United States Secretary of Agriculture. And then the state over order would be issued by some state government agency. Currently, we have a state milk commission that could issue that regulation. And that what we're talking about is whether to reauthorize that current commission in some form to issue an order, revamp that commission in another form, or as they've done in Maine, have the legislature issue the provisions of the order itself. So there's a lot of issues all bundled together, but the basic design of this is that the state would be issuing a regulation that is premised on and built on top of the federal program. So in working through this presentation, as I said, there are basically two functional issues, the pooling and the pricing. And then above that is kind of the overarching question of what is the objective of the regulation. And I've found that going over state and federal regulations, this is the common theme, that you're identifying what is the objective of the regulation as a matter of public policy, and then the mechanics of how to do that in milk market regulation through pooling and producer pricing. So that this basic design will kind of run its way through the whole presentation. So then sort of the variety of issues emerge, and this is why I split the presentation in half. On the one hand, you have to identify what your objective is. And then the basic mechanical part is what pool of milk is available to a state to regulate as a matter of law. So you have to identify the pool in terms of how the market works. And then once you've done that, which we did, in concept, you have to assess whether it's legal. And that's the first step before you go any farther. So that's what we're talking about today. And we'll hear from Professor Denning in the latter part of the meeting as to the law. And then the second piece is the pricing procedure, which is, again, are you going to do this by a regulation from the executive branch through the Department of Agriculture or some other department that's under the executive branch of government, or do you have the legislature do it, which would be a handling fee? And then the formula, and that's where everybody gets lost in the federal regulation, is how the pricing formula works. It's not as complicated for a state program, as we'll talk about, but then who's going to set it? How's it going to be collected? How's it going to be enforced? How are the farmers get paid? There's a whole bunch of issues, and it just got too dense to try to do that in one meeting along with the pooling. So I'm proposing that we have one meeting to talk about pooling and one meeting to talk about pricing, and the environmental costs get into the pricing procedure. So that would be part of that meeting as well. And then in addition to that, there's the whole discussion of, okay, we set up a pooling mechanism, we integrate a pricing procedure, which results in a process that makes an assessment on the milk plants doing business in Vermont, pays the money to the farms that are supplying the milk plants. What is the impact of that on the marketplace? So that's a whole other set of issues independent of how it works. So there's a lot to talk about in what we're thinking about doing. And I tried to unbundle the issues and come up with a sequence for addressing them. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but behind me, there's a door that says fire door. So feel free to either ask me questions as we go forward or say, go out the door, Dan, that's enough. So I just,
The members, are we all going to receive this copy?
Yeah.
So,
okay. So, okay, but before as a kind of a backdrop for the whole discussion, I've decided to dub this Senator Starr's Dairy Update. He's always, in terms of what we're doing, making sure that we consider, what's happening on the farm, but in addition, while the farm history is played out over the last period of time, what has happened since the legislature has put so much time and effort into building a value-added products industry in the state, that's a big part of the equation. So on the farm side, just by basic milk facts, there's common discussion that we're losing fluid milk sales. So I put that up so you have numbers to consider. This is in pounds. You divide gallons, divide basically by 9 and you come up with gallons. But basic point is 250 to 150, 100 against 250 over the past 35 years, and it's accelerating. You can see it in the last part of the slide, and this slide ends in 2017, and it's accelerating even more into 2021. So people are drinking less milk. At the same time, the consumption of dairy products, which is everything, ice cream, cheese, yogurt, is increasing over time and has more than made up the difference. So even though,
Hey, Dan,
sorry, yeah,
excuse me. So is this nationwide or Vermont data?
now this nationwide.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So at the same time, there's been a quite dramatic decline in drinking milk. There's been an equally dramatic increase in the consumption of dairy products. Maybe not quite as dramatic, but yeah, John.
Dan, if you added in the non-dairy beverages,
Yeah.
what does that look like?
There is information on that. The non-dairy beverages are basically displacing the fluid consumption. Yeah.
So it's about the same consumption if we call this.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can look to see, but my guess is it's a relatively marginal increase overall in consumption. Yeah, but it does explain that in yogurt consumption, really the displacement of fluid is into yogurt and the non-cow milk. So with that as the double backdrop, we can in our screen see the lower right corner? Is that black box, is that on everybody's screen, Linda? Do you guys see a black box that blocks out the last?
No.
Okay, so the point of this picture really, and in terms of what Bobby's talked about, down at the bottom, this was from Diane's presentation just a couple of weeks ago. Down at the bottom is the number of dairy farms. These aren't federal order farms. These are total Vermont farms. So in the last 5 years, basically, the number of farms has dropped from 800 to 540, I think is the number down in the far right corner. So that's where we are in terms of basic farm numbers over the past few years. On the other hand, this is the bigger picture of Vermont in the federal order. Going back to the beginning of the federal order in 2000, the federal order statistics are by state. So all of the states from Connecticut on the left side to West Virginia and everything in between, those are the supplying states. And there are some extras. The number symbols is not that the columns are too small. That means there are too few numbers to report because you wouldn't have confidentiality because there's so few farms in those states. And there are additional states that are even fewer that only show up every once in a while. If you were to look, you'd see Rhode Island doesn't even show up in New England as a supplying state anymore. But these are the supplying farms in the states that supply the federal milk market order 1. So Vermont, in the top slide, in the last 20 years has dropped from 1,549 farms to 520. The volume of milk is down, 100 million pounds of milk. You can see in the middle, it's gone down more over time and come back up. So that number has stayed pretty constant. We are in a dip at this point. But down at the bottom, you'll see that the percentage of the share of Vermont to the whole federal order supply has dropped roughly 2%. If you look at all of the states, the only state that all of the other states except for New York and Maine have diminished, and New York's supply has gone up quite substantially. So New York has always traditionally served as the surplus for the Northeast federal order, and that's happening again to make up, which is a big change for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's milk production has gone down some, which that's a pretty astonishing figure. I just highlight Maine has stayed the same. They're pretty minimal supply, but it hasn't changed. So their program has had an impact over the years.
Yeah, Dan, as that New York number has gone up a lot from 44 to 51.
Yeah.
And I don't know about their consumption or usage within their own state, but we do know that a lot of that New York milk gets trucked into West Springfield into the powder plant.
Yeah.
And I would think, what little bit I know about milk and milk pricing, that would alter the more milk that goes into that powder plant and made powder would alter our overall price to our dairy farmers. And I'm wondering, is that accurate or?
Yeah, when we get into a little bit deeper in the weeds, we can see what's happened on that one. So hold on to that. You're absolutely right. We can see it too. So that's the on the farm side in Senator Starr's update. Over the last 20 years, really close to 2/3 of the farms have exited. And you'll if there's 520 farms that are federal order farms and Diane's number of total farms 540, the number's a little. I've been trying to chase down between the number of farms that are in the federal order and the numbers that are out. It's a hard number to calculate. Jackie.
So I just have a question, because you mentioned Maine seemed to be stabilized due to their pricing system, but doesn't Pennsylvania have an over order pricing system for their farmers? And so that has dropped. So I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, and we'll talk about, I was gonna do comparative Pennsylvania and Maine in detail, and it got too much, but we'll talk about Maine some when we get to the Maine part. Yeah, good question. Very different programs. Lost my train of thought. So that's the farm side. So loss of a substantial number of farms, milk supply staying relatively even, some erosion of the state's share in the federal order supply. So on the industry side, scouting around, IDFA has put together a really, really comprehensive analysis of every state impact of the dairy industry in every state. It's on their website. I've got the link down in the bottom there. You can go in and get this for every state and additional information that I'll show in a minute. I think people that have been around the work that I've done, IDFA and I have not gotten along too well. And I have to say, I take what they say with a certain grain of salt. And so, but their analysis is very comprehensive, and I think as at least from a analytical standpoint is really useful baseline numbers. To me, it talks about 3.5% of the U.S. GDP. That seems a little hard to say, and 13% of the state's GDP. That's quite a bit more than the in-state calculation, and tremendous direct impact and indirect impact. So, but with my qualification, clearly the Vermont dairy industry as an industry is a substantial economic industry at this point. And I think that's really your point, Bobby, is to keep in mind that while the farms have been exiting, the state's industry has been really flourishing. So
What year is this data?
Sorry?
What year is this data from?
Current.
This
As far
year,
as-
last year.
From the website, yeah.
Okay,
I believe that's the case.
thanks.
So, I think Bobby's point is well taken, and really, Bobby, when you talk about all the time and effort you've put in, you can see the results. So they go through, soup to nuts, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but these are the direct impacts broken down by product, down to retail and wholesale, substantial numbers, particularly on the retail side. The supplying businesses, what the impact of that is, and all the way through to the induced is indirect in economics. So, from construction to retailing, and then down to taxes. So what the tax impact for the state is as well. So if you have a little time and interest, this is really quite comprehensive, and you can compare to the other states. So that's Senator Starr's update, Bobby. That's the backdrop of what we're doing here. So now on to the specific idea. As I said, we're trying to identify the pool of Vermont milk that under the state's authority can be regulated as a matter of law. That's what we're looking for. So get started. Chris gave us this slide that shows the starred states, or the states that are have assumed their regulatory jurisdiction and established prices. The stars in the West, the white areas are unregulated under the federal law. So those aren't overorder programs. Those are actually state programs that are not, the federal order, as Chris said, indirectly impacts the milk marketing in those states, but they're not subject to actual price regulation. On the East Coast, Pennsylvania, as Jackie said, has a state regulation. Virginia down there in the sort of greenish yellow, they have an active state regulation. And Maine, even though Maine shows up as a white area, they're tied to the white, the blue is the Northeast federal order. We're part of that. Maine's supply is part of the federal order. It's basically, for all accounts, part of the New England federal, Northeast federal order. It gets a little complicated. The sales of milk in Maine are outside of the order, but they're basically in the order. So Maine, Pennsylvania, Virginia, those are the parallels. The order in New York State, New York is obviously in the federal order. That the white part of New York is outside of the federal order. The blue part on the eastern side, that's where all the people are. But that white area, there's a federal order there. It should be a star. I don't know that the star is in the wrong place. But well, I guess that's Pennsylvania. There's the white area of New York is under a state order that operates in concert. That's really not too relevant to our discussion, but there are really four state orders, 5 state orders four: Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, and Maine. Those are the 4 in the Northeast that give us some context. And then I added to Chris's slide, since this slide I put together, Arkansas has established a federal order, a state order. And I also added that California had a state order for a long, long time, and is a close parallel to what we're doing. And I'll have to talk about that at the next meeting. I didn't get to that for this, but just basic state regulation, that's what we have as a backdrop. My program, my presentation, we get into the federal order pooling, because that's the basic concept of milk market regulation pooling is in the federal order. And I think it'll, the task force needs to advance its understanding of how the federal order works. So we take Chris's presentation and apply that to the idea of a state order. That's my objective, is to give a better understanding of how the two work together. Then focus on the main state program as the most immediate analogy. And then just second, Jackie, to your point, we'll get into the Pennsylvania program. And Virginia is really interesting what they're doing. So as we go along, I'll provide that as more of a backdrop. And then I have to spend some time with you with California, because there's a key part of what California is doing that's important to what we're doing. So that's will be the context of our discussion going forward. So we'll start with the federal order. So Chris's,
Jackie.
yeah, Jackie, did you have a question? No, you didn't. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm just stretching my fingers.
Chris's discussion really went through kind of a lot of all the complexity of what's involved with federal milk market regulation. We don't have to deal with all of it. The pricing will come up in the next piece. But if you were a milk plant thinking about establishing yourself in a federal order, you'd spend a lot more time on that than we're going to spend. Since we're doing over order pricing, the pooling is really more at issue with how the federal order works. The pricing is less of consequence. So I pulled out what are the kind of primary components to how the federal order pools milk. And you establish a marketing area that's regulated. The supply for that product sales. And then you get into the mechanics of how the pool is set up. And that's the classified use and pricing, which Chris talked about, and I'll go back through in a minute. And then how the farmers, the producers, how they end up getting a uniform minimum price out of that pool. So those are the kind of working parts to pooling: market area, supply for the market area, classified use and pricing for that supply, and then the Rube Goldberg machine that takes the pool and ends up generating a uniform minimum producer price. It's uniform. That's the point. So,
but there isn't anything in the federal order that requires a milk processor to pay the suggested pooling price, all right? A milk processor or buyer can reduce the price paid to the farmer below the pooling suggested price.
they have to pay the minimum classified price for their product that they have to pay. So the cooperative is not required to pay the uniform minimum price. Yeah. The proceeds are pooled back to them collectively. And then how the cooperative chooses to pay individual producers, the cooperative is treated as a producer under.
So what the federal order says that the uniform minimum producer price sharing, what they suggest that to be, the farmer in some cases.
If you ship to a cooperative, if you ship to a proprietary handler directly, the handler has to pay the uniform minimum price. That's the starting point. If you're not a member of a cooperative, you ship to Hood. Hood has to pay the minimum class 1 price for the milk that they buy on the one hand, and once the pool blends out and the uniform minimum price is established, you as a producer shipping to Hood are guaranteed that as a minimum. Me as a producer shipping to Agamark or DFA is guaranteed that minimum as a cooperative member, but not necessarily as an individual
Farmer
participant member. Yeah.
Yes, because I've had several calls from farmers saying that we don't get the minimum producer price. We get what the co-op sends us, and I don't know if that's regulated by the cooperative board of directors or who
Yeah, the board.
makes that determination. And the farmers that have called me, they don't know either, because they claim they've never voted on that. But of course, they have group directors. It's like us as representatives. We represent people within our district. And so I just wanted to bring that up, not that it's
Well,
important right
I think
now,
that issue, there are issues that go across the pooling and the pricing discussions, and that's one of them. So I think we can get into that issue more when we talk about pricing, because that's really where it shows up more, but it is an important point. I ran over, we've got to start with the objective, then we get into the pooling mechanics. So, these are the, basic moving parts, and these are the working parts. So starting with the objective, Chris's presentation, that's where it started. The objective of federal milk marketing orders been pretty consistent since it got started in the 30s. I find their order of presentation somewhat interesting. The basic starting point is a supply of milk for fluid milk markets, and that's to be provided in an orderly manner with price stability. And his point is a good one, whether it's price stability or to reduce uncertainty, that has evolved, at least in the economists' minds, over time. But those are the objectives of federal milk market orders. Supply of fluid milk, orderly marketing, which includes price stability, and then equitable return to farmers. It's important to highlight. So that's the backdrop for the federal regulation and for all milk market regulation. The question is, when you go to do state regulation, how are you going to feather into those objectives? And there is a challenge in doing that, which you'll see as we go forward. Okay, so yeah.
Dan,
You want me to go back to that slide? Or?
no, well, I'm just thinking, if you take, say, our region 1, is sort of the target for, when you're talking about marketing, like we start with a consumer price and work our way back, or is it targeting what, the producers, the farmers, or is it somewhere in between, the processors?
It's all on the consumer side is assuring them the adequate supply of and stable supply of fluid, orderly marketing of fluid milk to consumers. The pricing mechanism that's necessary to assure that is all around the producer side, does not take in the consumer issue at all. And I don't know if you remember at the end of Chris's presentation, he indicated that consumers can participate in federal order hearings as if their interest is represented. They can't, they're not. There's a Supreme Court decision that a consumer group in the 70s tried to challenge, kind of on the theory of what's behind your question. What about us? You're raising the price of milk to us here. And the Supreme Court said, we're not going to consider your argument on the merits because you don't have standing to raise it. So consumers are just not part of the federal order pricing. It's the handlers who buy the milk and the farmer's cost of production. There's a lot of how much you weight those big issue in what's happened over time, but it's all on the milk production and raw milk and processing production side, not consumer side.
So is there any, sort of gaming of the economies between the regions? If I can produce milk in this region and ship it, or
Absolutely.
process it
Yeah.
here in
Yeah.
region one, I'm making
Yeah.
something.
So we'll look at the market area map and you're absolutely right. That's a big part of the challenge of as the industry has gone from a regional, it's still regional on the fluid side, but it's gone national and international on the manufactured side. And from, this is I would, from my vantage point, the system has, the regulatory system has not been updated to reflect that. And that's part of the reason it's like a balking machine at this point. It's still a fluid oriented market. And to Bobby's point, how the fluid consumption against the manufacturer consumption has gone whoop, like that. It's gone tilt. And there's a great slide that Brian gave us that shows that. So Chris gave us a little more meat on the bones. Number one, you have to define your market area, which is a function of the fluid beverage products distribution, which is, what we were talking about before, John. It's the consumers in the marketing areas. That's the public interest. And then it's the assurance of supply to them. That's the pricing part to assure that supply. And that shows up in this set of classified use pricing, minimum prices. Handlers can pay more than the minimums, but they have to pay at least the minimums, which is devised to provide stability. And then there's a revenue pooling sharing to end up with a uniform blend price to the producers. So those are the three moving parts of the federal order. Whoops. Well, we lost that one. Chris gave us a good slide. We have, based on the previous slide, you're regulating the fluid handlers who are supplying the milk to the fluid marketing areas. And then you're also regulating the manufactured milk plants that are in the marketing area, because they're basically the surplus supply to the fluid market. If the fluid supply gets thin to the plants, then in basic construct of the federal order, in order to assure a supply, you have to have some surplus supply. Those are the manufactured plants. So the manufactured plants in the marketing area are also regulated. It's not mandatory. If they have participation in the fluid market, they're in. Otherwise, they can choose to get in. And then there's all kinds of machinery to assure that. But basically, you have the fluid plants, mandatory participants, and the manufactured products, cheese, butter, powder, all the rest of it, located in the marketing area. Those are the regulated plants under a federal order. Oh, there they are. Wow. I have no idea what I just did, but there we are. I've always wanted to be able to do this, but I have no idea how to do it. Okay, so now kind of put together, and with John, your question in mind, right? So the blue is the Northeast marketing area. So consumers in those states, their milk, our milk, is subject to the minimum pricing and pooling regulation to assure that I have a stable supply of beverage milk, which I think people kind of rely on, that on some level, if you go to the grocery store, you're going to have fluid milk on the shelves. And what's behind that is almost 100 years of federal milk market regulation that is served to assure that supply is not going to be interrupted. So the supply chain issues with the pandemic have obviously put tremendous pressure on that, but that's been the super test of the program, and we're on the other side of it. But that's the basic federal regulation. Northeast in blue, and now to your point, John, you go down. If you go down the East Coast, the next order down, the Appalachian order, there's going to be some movement of milk between the orders, movement of products manufactured, soft products between the orders. So you can't get the pricing too much out of alignment. because you start to have dislocation in the market. So the federal order program is wrestling with what you're talking about. You go down south, the Florida order and the order above the Florida order, big issues in how they supply the Florida order. There was some discussion when Chris was talking, Nick was talking about the class 1 price down in the Florida order is way higher because you're trying to draw milk into that lower corner, which is a milk deficit area. In the Panhandle, there's actually a fair amount of milk production. It's a wonderful, it's hot, but other than that, you can make milk in that part. And then into the south is a supply area in distress. So they pull a lot of milk in from the Southwest, the Texas, New Mexico order, whole bunch of trucking issues involved with that. So as you go around the country to different regions, there are issues of tension and pressure that the system is always dealing with. And then California is kind of the big bang in this whole. There was a state order, wasn't even in the federal order until 4 years ago. So the green is only 4 years against the whole rest of the system dating back to the 1930s. And California is now 20% of the milk supply. So even though they weren't in the federal system, they built their industry up under their state order. So they're now 20% of the milk supply. And now they're in the federal system. So that's a remarkable issue. And like I said, I wanted to get into that more today. And we'll get into that as we go along, because how they did that's an important part of our discussion. So, John, if that helps for your question, you can see it. And the tension used to be the Midwest, up in the top there. That used to be the surplus milk production for the whole country, Wisconsin and to a lesser extent Minnesota. There was always a tension between the Midwest and the Northeast, because the Midwest felt that the market, they should be able to move milk from that area into the Northeast, because the demand for class 1 products in the Northeast, that was the most valuable part of the milk business, was the fluid milk business in the Northeast. The product was worth the most. That's where most of the people were. But to move milk from Wisconsin to the Northeast, 1,200, 1,500 miles, very difficult to do that. So from a functional standpoint, it was difficult to see how that was going to work. But for 85 years, that was the tension in the milk business. That tension is really diminished because California has really stood up now as being the manufactured base of the dairy industry at this point. Wisconsin makes 25 billion pounds of milk. California makes 40 billion pounds of milk. So the industry is changed a lot.
But that California issue could disappear quickly if the water doesn't flow down from
Absolutely
the Rockies. And
well, it's the aquifer, right? Yeah. And since I started, that's been an issue. Subsidized water has allowed California to build its dairy industry. I think the bigger issue is it's hot in California. They have to import all their feed. It's not really a natural place to make milk. Absolutely the water, but there's a lot of other pressures. But milk has displaced fruits and vegetables, and it's as the number one item. It's a fascinating story, really, of industrial organization. Okay, we could
Historically, where do the farmers get paid the least for producing milk? Does it because there's so much surplus in Wisconsin or New England? Is it, or does it adjust itself as the economy?
Yeah. So between the regulated price or the market price, the least are you talking about?
What the orders? The minimum orders. Yeah.
So the way it's structured, if you have sufficient milk for the class 1, then the class 1 differential that is devised to assure the supply. That's the key. The manufacturer prices are all the same for the whole system. The only variant is the class 1 price. So in a market area that has a substantial supply, the class 1 differential is lower. historically, that was the upper Midwest. So their regulated minimum prices were lower. Same with California, their regulated minimum prices are lower. And the South higher, Northeast higher. So that's been, and that's, been a part of the reason the Midwest has been critical of the federal order program, because their price is historically lower, but their class 1 utilization was always in the 20% range. The Northeast, until relatively recently, was in the 40, 50, high 50 range. But we're now, you'll see coming up real soon, that it's all changed. The whole devise is gone. So, okay, so marketing areas, objective, provide a fluid supply, stable fluid supply to a marketing area. The marketing area is around where the people live. So the Northeast cities, that's the pivot. In each of the colors, it's built around the cities where the populations are. Those are the marketing areas. So then the supply for the marketing area is farms in states. So that's the milk sheds. The milk sheds for the cities. So in the Northeast, the cities used to be just Boston. There was an order around Boston supplied by farms in New England, got merged with the New York and Pennsylvania orders in 2000. So the cities are, primarily Boston, New York City, and Pennsylvania. And then the farms that in the milk sheds around those cities extend from Connecticut to West Virginia and fill in between. So currently, the total is to the right, fell off the screen. But those are the states and the individual producers on the first slide add up. And then the volume of milk is the second row. And that's in hundreds of millions of pounds. So Vermont is down there at 2.5. New York is almost 14 billion pounds. So New York's 1, Pennsylvania's 2, Vermont is 3. And as I said before, the other states are in decline. Maryland still makes a lot of milk. Massachusetts used to be a pretty primary supplier, Massachusetts and Connecticut, to the Boston order. If you were to reconfigure the Boston order, things look very different. Vermont would be roughly half, 40 to 50% of the milk supply to Boston. And now it's 9%. So when Vermont got merged into the order, now it's 10% instead of roughly half. So Vermont's participation got diminished, even though the volume of milk that it's produced basically the same. But that's the supply to the federal order.
Up on the top row, Dan, if you could. Connecticut only has 71 farms left.
Yeah, big farms, relatively speaking. Yeah.
Oh, they're a lot bigger than ours.
Yeah.
But
always have been.
You take, we know Maine is small farms. I don't know about Mass, but Mass, New Hampshire,
Smaller.
they're.
You can see it. Mass basically the same number as Connecticut, and half.
From those numbers, it looks to me like Vermont is supplying a lot of the milk into the Boston region, but it's New York and Pennsylvania, not so much Pennsylvania, but it's that New York milk that runs from out towards Syracuse and that way into our Boston market that I think is causing our numbers, our pay numbers, to be low, because they have a surplus of milk. I bet you 10-1 in New York.
Sure.
And they're pushing it into the powder plants and onto the market in New England to try to get a better price. And
that's really interesting to say that, Bobby. You and I have been at this a long time. And what you just said was my starting point when I get into this with Roger 3 years ago to look at supply management. That assumes sort of the evolution of the fluid milk market. It's all gone, Bobby.
Well, we gave it away.
No. It's better than that. The Vermont, 2.5 billion pounds of milk. Most of that milk is now staying in
Home,
the state
That's true.
for the manufactured plants that are in Vermont. The decline, the sales in Boston have declined in half since 2000. So the demand for fluid milk is cratered to begin with. And at the same time, they reconfigured the federal order so that you didn't have a supply from Vermont to Boston. You used to have the Boston supply and the New York supply under two different federal orders. It's now the same order. So New York can ship milk and to plants, and the plants are now farther away from Boston. You're in Agawam, you're near Albany, and the milk is coming in from New York. But at the same time, Vermont has built this industry.
Home.
Yeah. So it's not that the New York milk has displaced the Vermont milk. The Vermont industry has recognized that the value is not in the fluid anymore.
It's in the value.
It's
add.
in your value-added products. And Vermont farms are supplying those plants.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I hope you'll see in the slides. Good question, but you got to look at the screen a different way. It's really interesting. Okay, back to traditional, we'll get there, but back to supply. So from Brian's presentation, but it's really Brian and Chris. These are the plants. We've got our market area, we've got our farm supply. So dairy farms in those states and some outside of those states, those are the farms that are supplying all those dots. Those are all different plants. I don't know if you can read, there's pool distributing plants, pool supply plants. The pool distributing, those are the fluid plants, and the pool supply, those are the manufactured plants. So these are the numbers of all of those. That's the current map. Brian gave us the numbers over time. So down at the bottom, gone from 81 total to 58. So 23 plants have ceased being, they're not necessarily out of business. Probably a lot of them are, but they may just no longer be associated with the order. There's certainly a number of fluid plants have gone out of business, including Thomas Dairy up here in Vermont, for example.
Yeah.
Somewhat, it took me a while, you'll see down pool supply plants. Those are the manufacturing plants that have chosen to associate or have some minimum supply, so they have to be part of the federal order. Gone from 17 to 1, but what's actually happened is, if you look up the next one, the pool supply system plants, those have basically, those are companies that own more than one plant. So those are now identified by the order as one unit. So it's not that all of those pool supply plants on the bottom have gone out of business. They've just been reorganized. So, but pool distributing, 17 plants reduction, that's the main plants that have gone out of business over the years. Those are the fluid milk plants. Consolidated, Dean went bankrupt. Some of those plants got shuttered. That's where the major change in the federal order is, the reduction of those plants. So, again, class 1 sales down, plants are going to go out of business. Consolidation and mergers, the net result is 64 to 47. Big change over time. Just now we get into classified use and pricing, and now we see, Bobby, where the market's gone to. So
Hey, Dan, Nick's had his hand up, and I don't know if it references back to something that you talked about earlier.
thank you. We can't see that.
Sorry.
Okay. Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And it's fine to just let this float until somebody picks it up. One of my question came up on the slide. You don't have to go back to it. The slide that had the class 1 production by state, which I just thought was really illuminating. And I was intrigued by the conversation that you and Bobby had about that. I think, for me, this is so essential because it raises the question of if Vermont puts an over order price on milk, what's the impact in the market potentially of that? How would we anticipate what might happen if the milk from Vermont gets more expensive? And so I think this, sort of seeing where Vermont sits in the stack of states that are producing milk in our region is one important aspect of that. And it's also just kind of surprising to see how much more production, by orders of magnitude, more production of milk happening in Vermont than in other New England states. We know that, but I think the numbers really tell a powerful story there. So that's all that I wanted to say.
Okay, and I think I appreciate your question, and it really fits to kind of the flow of the discussion, the impact on the marketplace. We got to get to how the pool works and how the price works, and then we can see how it might impact the market.
Dan, without getting too far off here, and we can come back to it. I just wondered how organics working with marketing orders have no connection to organic pricing, or
Basically, no connection.
okay.
And the organic association is holding a forum on that next week in Middlebury. They're trying to figure out a way if they can disrupt that lack of connection in the upcoming farm bill.
Okay, because on that map of plants, there's Commonwealth's not on there, Stonyfield plants not on there.
Well, they're
right?
coming. They're
Oh,
coming.
okay.
They're coming. Let's just
Yeah.
go back here for a second. So in Vermont's 2.5 billion pounds of milk, organic milk is about 150 million pounds of it.
Uh-huh.
That's the volume. And most of that milk is regulated under the federal order. Not all of it. The farmstead milk is not. But the milk that goes to Stonyfield, the milk that goes to Booth Brothers is regulated under the federal order.
Okay.
And that's most of it. Okay, so, begin to classify. This is from Chris's slide. It's very nice, sort of simple explanation where you can see 4 different classes under the federal order. And so, yes, this is where things start to get, more complicated. But for our purposes, you have class 1 is what goes in the bottle. And then the other classes is what doesn't go in the bottle. That's the basic distinction. The class 2 are the soft priced products, and then you get into the increasingly harder products as you go through the classes. But you have fluid products and manufactured products. Class 1 fluid, manufactured products are the other classes. The more important, and this is for you, Bobby, what's happened over time in terms of those different classes. Fluid is the blue on the top. So fluid utilization actually went up the first couple of years of the order. Production was going down as part of it because sales were going down. But in any case, this is 20 years now. So you look at the blue from Brian did the heights, 46%, was 45, 44% at the beginning. We're now down under 30%. So the class 1 utilization in the federal order now is less than 30%. Wisconsin was always in the 20s. And everybody would say, well, that's because Wisconsin's a manufactured federal order. It's not a fluid order. Well, guess what? The Northeast order is starting to really become a manufactured order, not a fluid order anymore. And that's an absolute transformation of the order. When I started, the Boston order was in the 50s. And that's where a federal order is more in balance. You have a basic fluid supply and you have a surplus supply on the manufactured side. That's what a federal order classically looked like. This federal order doesn't look like anything resembling what the classic federal order was. So then the other part is on the manufactured side. If you look at the yellow, the class 4 at the beginning, you're down around 10%. Now you're up around, you doubled to 20%.
Yeah.
That's the absolute surplus in the market is the manufactured products. That's the butter and the powder. Well, the demand for butter has gone way up compared to what it was. So there is less an element of surplus to that than there's actually a demand for that product that's independent of it serving as a surplus for the fluid market. And then the other one is the class 2, the yogurt. Yogurt sales have gone way up in the 20 years. And that's, as I said before, to John's question, the displacement of fluid sales is not only in the non-cow milk products, it's also people are eating or drinking yogurt, more of that, and drinking less milk. And they're putting way less milk. You do this enough till your eyes fall out. One of the USDA statistics is the milk that goes into cereal, whatever, you know what I mean? But when you dig into it, that's actually a big reason why people are drinking less milk. People don't eat breakfast as much at home. They're eating on the fly. And then, so you're not going to be able, and they sold these things with the cereal and the milk in a container that you could be driving and pour your milk and eat at the same time. Well, that's a great idea,
Yeah.
So, but it turns out to be a relevant, statistic in why fluid milk sales. It's not just that you don't drink milk out of a glass. It's not in your cereal too. Anyway, so, but Bobby, that's the what's gone on in the Northeast market is not just Vermont displacing fluid milk supply. The fluid milk supply is way down. Yeah, and if you go to to pounds, it's so on the left side, 25 million pounds of milk, round numbers. So if you're 46% of 25 billion pounds, 12 billion pounds, round numbers, right? You go on the right side at 30%, and now it's 27 billion pounds of milk. That's less than 9 billion. So you've gone from 12 to 9, you've lost a third of this, a third.
Yeah.
Okay. So basic point, if we're, our basic marketing area is all built around the fluid sales, that's 30% of the market. That means the manufactured products, 70% total. Those products are being sold without regard to the market order. The pricing is with regard to the market order because theoretically that's the surplus for the fluid. But basically now those 2 to 4 products are being sold everywhere. It's not just in the marketing area. It's not just nationally. In 3 and 4 are being sold all over the world. So we have to keep that in mind. And Nick, this is partly to your point. You're now in a national market. So we have to, this is the reduction, key piece reduction to your question. Products going outside the marketing area. And Vermont products, ice cream is a class 2 product. Cheese is a class 3 products. Those are products competitive in regional and international markets.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nick, your hand is up. I don't know if you have a question or if you just have your hand up. Okay. You were stretching your arm too. Okay, so now we've done all of this machinations, and Chris did all the pricing, which we'll talk about more next. But you take all of that pool calculation to come up with the ultimate order pricing. That's the end product of all this. So how does that happen? In simple terms, and I don't mean simplistic, but in basic terms, it's done monthly. The handlers and the pool plants, handlers are everybody that receives money, milk from farmers, but basically the pool plants report to the market administrator on a monthly basis. And the market administrator does a calculation of the pool, and then the price comes out of that. And what's being reported are the producer receipts on the one hand to the plant, and then the use. So Agrimark makes some powder, makes some cheese. So they report how much milk they receive from their producers. They report how much milk went to cheese and which class 3, how much milk went to butter and powder, class 4. DFA, the plant up in St. Albans, receives milk. Some of that they sell as cream to Ben and Jerry's, class 2. They sell some of the milk to a fluid plant in Boston, class 1, and they make some butter and powder themselves, class 4. And all of that gets reported. It's, the Pennsylvania plants, the New York plants, all of those plants are doing the same reports. And out of that, I took, Chris gave us the price announcement for this past July, and it's got I broke out the different pieces of it. So here's the pool. That's the pool. If in a monthly basis, the total pool is down on the right side, roughly 3 billion pounds of milk for the month. Those are the class utilizations for that particular month. 27% class 1, 24% class 2, 30% class 3, and 19% class 4, and the pounds. So that's the pool on the federal order now. So then from that pool, you add on the prices, and the prices are set by USDA. Like I said, that's where your head falls off trying to figure all that out. But those prices are, again, monthly, reported to the market administrator from USDA. So now we have a pool and pricing, and the net result is down at the bottom, the pricing. And so if you look above the bottom line, statistical uniform price, you see that? That's the uniform price for the whole market. That is the benchmark price to a producer. So up
27.89.
well, there's two of them. There's one that at the standard statistical uniform price for the Boston market is at 3.5 butterfats. And then the next one takes into account all the components. That's where the pricing gets complicated. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But those two statistical uniform prices come out of the pool that's up above. So the total pool value, I'm sorry, that's in the way there. The total pool value for the month was $428 million. That gets allocated out to the producers at a uniform minimum based on their components. And that's where, it gets hinky, but you basically have a pool value that's shared among all the producers at a uniform minimum price. And that's so you have your pool, supply, price, and then your calculation to the individual producers. So they end up with a net minimum price.
It's really strange though that class 3 utilization is the highest utilization of our milk products. I mean, you'd think, one we know has gone down for various reasons, but class 2, they're down 110, 120, 130 below class 3.
Yeah.
And
But it's tremendous transformation of the dairy industry is shown in that slide. Absolutely.
Yeah. Dan, can you remind us that because the minimum class prices seem so important and just in the composition of revenue overall. So who sets the minimum class price and what is it based on?
The minimum class price on the far right side is calculated by USDA using the formulas for each of those products that account for the components.
Okay.
Fat, protein, other solids, those are producer, but those are the components of milk that in different formulaic configurations that USDA comes up with it's supposed to be a price discovery mechanism. So what the market values those components at dictates what the different components are. And it varies based on the use, what those components are worth. So when you make butter as compared to powder, the components are worth different amounts, and the formulas are supposed to capture that.
And do we basically think that the USDA does a good job of that price discovery, or are there questions and controversy about that?
In the milk business, there's controversy about everything.
Yeah.
It depends who you talk to, whether they're doing a good job or not. So that's really very difficult question to answer. I think there's from the standard of commercial commodity dairy, I think there's a belief that they do a good job. Where it gets challenging is there's an element called the make allowance, which is the value, and Chris went into that. If you go back to his slide, you'll see that. That's the make allowance is what it actually costs the manufacturers to make the product, and what you do with that make allowance. That's where most of the disagreement, controversy, and they're looking to go to hearing on that issue in the next year. So the formulas themselves and the valuation, they fight about that less than they do the make allowance, I would say.
Thanks.
Yeah, John.
Then at what point, it's interesting when I talk to dairy farms, like who was the kid who came into the press conference? He was from Derby or Newport last year.
Oh,
You know,
the young guy?
Yeah, like him or Peggy Ainsworth, like these dairy farmers are saying, I'm doing okay right now because my components are getting, more than this minimum price.
Yeah.
So does that depend on where their milk's going, or is it just what's coming out of the cow?
What's coming out of the cow? So that's for the next discussion.
Okay.
That's the pricing issue. Yeah. But for our purposes today, the statistical uniform price is the key. You have a pool, all the different classes. Every farmer's milk check reflects the utilization and the valuation put. With that, it doesn't matter. If my milk goes to Ben and Jerry's, my milk goes to DFA, excuse me, Bobby's goes to Agamark, and John's goes to Stonyfield, the basic minimum price is the same for all three of us, including the organic farmer. That minimum price to all three of us is the same, even though our milk went to plants that valued milk completely different in terms of it's.
But we don't all get that minimum price. John might get more, or you might get more, and I could get less depending on what co-op we send our milk to, because co-ops take money. The farmer co-ops take money out of that minimum pricing.
So, and the market order system says that's not an issue to us. What is an issue to us is to make sure that we have enough of the blue for the
Yeah,
market.
That's all they
And
care
how the
about.
pricing breaks out, as long as we have enough of the blue, it's up to the co-ops to do what they want with that payment. As long as we have enough of the blue, the public policy is being satisfied.
Guys, I just wanted to also say, it absolutely depends on what that co-op is using that milk for as to what that price to the farmer is, over and above whatever they're charging the farmers for dues or field staff or whatever. So it isn't just where you're shipping your milk to as a co-op, it's or as an independent, whoever you're shipping your milk to, it's what they're doing with that milk, which predicates the price that you're getting. Isn't that true?
That's a complicated question, Jackie.
Well, I just don't want to be always pushing, and with all due respect, and I've been a Cabot Agrimark farmer for 30 years, not one anymore, but and I know that there's also challenges within the co-ops, but I don't think all of this can be pointed to this co-op is paying less than this co-op. It has a lot to do with the components, to Representative O'Brien's point. And I also think it has a lot to do with whatever those cooperatives are using their milk for. So that, and I agree, it's a complicated question and an argument, but I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Yeah, and I again, it's a pricing issue. And I think when we get into pricing, we can tease out the different pieces of what's at issue. For this part, is what the federal order is trying to assure is sufficient class 1 supply for a marketing area, and how the co-ops choose their farmers. I'm not, good, bad, or indifferent. From the federal order standpoint, that's of secondary concern to the federal order. I think it becomes more of an issue if the state's going to do a state regulation. That becomes more an issue, and that's where I think we have to dig into the issue, because you don't want to dislocate when the co-ops are making business judgments that they need to make. We have to make sure that, to Randy's point last meeting, you don't have an unintended negative consequence that the state order might cause a problem for those business decisions. Land's right at home for, Agamark between Cabot and the West Springfield plant. They're making decisions, and the price regulation may or may not impact those. And we have to see how that works out as we go forward in the discussion. And I used impact as a verb, which I apologize.
Dan, sorry, I know you want to get off that slide so bad, but I got one more just question for you. And this is a basic question. I'm not going to call it a stupid one yet. But we may have covered this already, but class 1, class 2, class 3, and class 4 are about utilization of the milk. It's not necessarily like a classing of the milk itself. Like class 1 milk isn't necessarily higher quality than the milk that's going into a class 2 or class 3 product. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the original design of the system, there was a difference in quality. And so, in the original design of the federal orders, you only had 2 classes. One was the fluid, 2 was the manufactured. The quality of the milk that went into the fluid product was a higher quality, was grade A, and grade B went into the manufactured products. That's all gone. There's still some distinctions in some federal orders, but not many. It's basically all grade A milk now.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so now we shift over.
Are we gonna take a break or?
We have to take a break. Okay.
Well, I mean, maybe some people would like to.
Yeah, well, I'm the one that
Are we
advocated.
shifting?
This is perfect time to take a break.
Yeah. So why not?
Slide-wise, I'm about halfway through, so I may have used up more time, but I have a bunch of slides I can run over pretty quick. So
why don't we just take, 5 to 8 minutes and we can grab a coffee, go to John or whatever. And we'll come back between close to 25 of 11. That everybody get that?